what does it actually mean to belong? Not just to a family or a community, but to a political body, a nation.
It's a question that Western thinkers have been arguing about for centuries. This whole concept of the citizen.
And it's so much more than just a passport. It's wrapped up in these huge debates about rights, about participation, about responsibility.
Today, we're going to dive into that very argument, using Mortimer J. Adler's incredible Syntopicon essay on the topic as our guide.
Our goal here is to give you a real shortcut into this massive conversation. We'll pull out the key definitions, look at the big historical shifts, and really shine a light on the philosophical fault lines.
It's a masterclass in seeing where the great minds have agreed, but maybe more importantly, where they fundamentally disagreed.
And to help us navigate this, we should mention, you are experiencing a unique two-host AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic text analysis of this foundational essay.
So to set the stage a little, Adler's essay is called simply Citizen. It's one of 102 introductions to what he called the great ideas.
And its placement in the collection in Volume 1 of the Syntopicon is very telling.
It is. It's right between change and constitution. That's not an accident. Adler is signaling that citizenship is never a fixed thing and is always tied to the legal and political structure of a society.
Okay, so let's get right into the essay's core argument. Adler makes it so clear that citizen is not just some legal label.
No, he frames it as a contested ideal. A relationship, really. It combines that formal membership with active participation and also a kind of moral responsibility.
And that means its definition has to change depending on the political system. A citizen in a monarchy is not the same as a citizen in a democracy.
And he grounds the whole discussion, initially in the classical world, with Aristotle. I mean, if you were at the original core definition, that's where you have to start.
Which is what, exactly?
In Aristotelian terms, a citizen is someone who both rules and is ruled in turn.
That phrase is so powerful. Rules and is ruled. It implies a constant give and take.
It's all about reciprocity. It immediately tells you that being a citizen is not a passive role. If you are subject to the law, you must also have a hand in making it.
But reality doesn't always live up to that ideal, which is why the essay digs deeper.
Precisely. Adler forces us to look at the different layers of meaning. He outlines three crucial distinctions that we really have to grasp.
Okay, lay those out for us.
The first one is the most basic. Legal status. This is just formal membership. You're protected by the law. You have certain rights, certain immunities.
Your passport, essentially.
Right. The second is the political role. This is the active part sharing and deliberation, holding office, voting. This is where you actually exercise power.
So the formal and the functional aspects, what's the third?
The third is what makes it a truly profound concept, the ethical vocation. This is the commitment to civic virtue, to putting the common good ahead of pure self-interest.
And that's something the state can't just grant you.
Exactly. The state can give you legal status and a political role, but the ethical part has to be cultivated by the person.
These distinctions really help clarify the big historical contrasts. For instance, the difference between a citizen and a subject.
A huge difference. A citizen participates. They are a co-author of the laws. A subject, well, a subject just obeys.
And even within the citizen category, there's another split.
Yes, between the active citizen and the passive citizen. The active one actually uses their political role. The passive one has the rights on paper, but for whatever reason, apathy or exclusion, they're mainly just on the receiving end of power.
That gap between the ideal and the reality really sets us up for the historical conversation, because citizenship in ancient Athens was a world away from what it is today.
Oh, completely. For Plato and Aristotle, in the Greek polis, it meant intense, direct, face-to-face participation.
But only for a very select few.
A tiny minority of men. It excluded women, slaves, foreigners. It was an exclusive club.
And then Rome comes along and just changes the scale of everything.
The sheer size of the Roman Empire forced a new formula. The idea of civis Romanus, a Roman citizen, was less about direct rule and more about a portable set of legal protections.
So you could be protected by Roman law even if you never set foot in Rome.
Exactly. And that's the beginning of this separation between participation and protection.
Then the medieval period adds another layer of complication. Not geographic, but spiritual.
Right. With Christian political theology, you now have a higher loyalty to the city of God. Your identity is split. You're a person, a subject of a king, but also a pilgrim, a citizen of a heavenly kingdom.
And that loyalty to God could, and often did, override loyalty to the king.
It fundamentally challenged the authority of any earthly ruler. The modern secular state couldn't really emerge until that relationship was sorted out.
Which brings us to the early modern transformation. This is where things get really radical.
Social contract theory. Hobbes, Locke, Rousseau. This is the point where the citizen gains what we call natural rights.
And Adler really emphasizes what a profound shift this was.
It's a total reversal. The citizen is no longer defined by their role inside a pre-existing state. They're defined by rights they possess before the state even exists.
The citizen now authorizes the government.
And, crucially, they retain what Adler calls a residual sovereignty.
What does that mean in practice, that residual sovereignty?
It means they are both the creators and ultimately the judges of the political order. It's the logic that justifies revolution. If the government breaks the contract, the citizens have the right to dissolve it.
So power no longer flows down from God to a king.
It flows up from the people.
And once that idea takes hold, the debate naturally shifts to, well, who are the people? Who counts as a full citizen?
Absolutely. The story from then on is one of expansion. The concept was forced open beyond just a small group of property-owning men.
We see this with industrialization, mass politics, and all the struggles over race, gender, and class.
These fights forced new questions about inclusion, not just about who gets to vote, but about social rights education, healthcare. The argument became that without those things, your political rights are hollow.
So the definition is constantly in a state of argument with itself, which I think brings us perfectly to the competing philosophical models that the essay identifies.
It does. But before we dive into those models, it's a good moment to pause and shift our focus from the history to the philosophy itself.
I agree, and this is a great point for us to mention Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel offering AI analysis, summaries, and critiques. It really encourages that kind of inspiring reflection and rational thought as we consider these fundamental differences.
So let's break down these competing models. Adler shows how different thinkers built their idea of a citizen on very different foundations.
What are the main blueprints, he points out?
Well, there are at least three major ones. The first we can call the Republican citizen. This model looks back to the ancient world, to the polis.
And it's defined by what?
Civic virtue, active participation, a willingness to sacrifice your private interests for the common good. Duty is the highest value here.
Duty over self-interest. That feels very different from the model that's probably more dominant today.
Very different. The second is the liberal citizen. This citizen is defined first and foremost by individual rights, by legal protections, and by freedom from government interference.
The focus there is on autonomy, on protecting the private sphere.
Right. If the Republican citizen asks, what can I do for my community? The liberal citizen asks, what must my community leave me free to do?
A really vital contrast. One is about duty, the other is about rights. What's the third model? It's a bit more sobering.
It is. We can call it the subject citizen.
Yeah.
This is someone who has the formal legal status of a citizen.
They have the passport.
They have the passport, but in reality, their participation is minimal, or it's manipulated, or it's just ineffective. It highlights that gap between what the law says and what happens in the real world.
And that model connects to another classic dilemma the essay raises, the tension between being a good citizen and being a good person.
This is such a critical point. What happens when the law demands something that your conscience says is wrong?
Can you be a good citizen by obeying that law, but in doing so, become a morally bad person?
It's the core question of civil disobedience. Adler forces you to see that simple obedience isn't always a virtue. Sometimes being a bad citizen in the eyes of the state is the most moral thing you can do.
The essay also really digs into the historical arguments about equality and hierarchy. For so long, the ideal of citizenship was used to exclude people.
Absolutely. Thinkers were constantly trying to justify limiting it based on property, gender, race, education.
So you have these grand philosophical statements about universal equality on one hand.
And then the brute reality of a very restricted franchise on the other. The whole struggle of modern politics has been about closing that gap, making sure the legal status translates into an equal political role for everyone.
Okay, so we've traced the history and we've explored these philosophical clashes. What does Adler suggest is the takeaway for us now? He makes his great point about information versus understanding.
Right. The information is knowing the definitions, the models, the history. The understanding is seeing how each of those things either supports or undermines human dignity and genuine self-government.
It moves it from a description of politics to an evaluation of the quality of our political life.
And that's why this essay is still so relevant. Our modern debates about immigration, about voting rights, about dual citizenship, there's just the latest chapter in this very old argument.
The argument has even expanded beyond borders.
It has, into transnational spaces with questions of global governance and into virtual spaces. I mean, what does active citizenship mean in a digital public square? The questions are the same, just the context has changed.
So what's the practical warning the essay leaves us with?
I think it's a stark one. If a society reduces citizenship to just passively consuming benefits, or to voting every few years based on sound bites, it risks becoming a society of subjects, not citizens.
Even in a democracy.
Especially in a democracy. The essay suggests that real freedom and equality aren't things you just possess. They're things you have to exercise through informed participation.
And that ultimately is the difference between being loyal to a particular government and being loyal to the ideal of justice itself.
That's the heart of it. True civic engagement builds a culture where every single person is seen as a capable co-author of our common life. That's the high bar that Adler, drawing on all of these great thinkers, sets for us.
It really is an incredible piece of work for training us to connect these big abstract ideas of rights to our concrete duties and to see that politics at every level is truly everyone's business. Find the resources we discussed, including the essay text, in the show notes below. Click the link on screen for more on this and other essay subjects. Subscribe, share, purchase via link, and think rationally. Nourish your mind on the go.